550 Cape Fire, and affiliates Talk Radio AM 1100 The Flag Fargo and Talk Radio 1090 The Flag in the Bakken. We're broadcasting live from the historic Peacock Alley American Grill in Bismarck, the National Cattlemen's Association Beef Innovator of the Year. You're about to find out what's happening in the North Dakota legislative session. Your host of the Legislature Today is Dale Wetzel, managing editor of Great Plains News and the Great Plains Examiner. If you have questions or comments or to watch the show, go to GreatPlainsNews.com. GreatPlainsNews.com. The Legislature Today is brought to you by the North Dakota Association of Oil and Gas Producing Counties, the Credit Union Association of the Dakotas, the University of Mary, the North Dakota Corn, Soybean and Grain Growers Association, and the North Dakota Ethanol Council, the Northwest Landowners Association, Touchstone Energy Cooperative, North Dakota Rural Electric Cooperatives Association, and members Minn Kota Power and Great River Energy, the North Dakota chapter of Concerned Women for America, the Expressway Inn and Suites, where a good night's rest costs less, and the Peacock Alley. It's time to get started. Another hour of the Legislature Today is on the air.
Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. This is the Legislature Today. We come to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota, where the snow from last weekend is still piled fairly high along the boulevards, but there are some parking spaces downtown, believe it or not. And if you wish to come down and enjoy a fine meal and a good drink and some nice conversation and a wonderful atmosphere, I would suggest that you visit the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck. And if you want to wave to us, we're up on the balcony. It's the kind of the brightly lit area where you'll see people's heads sticking out, and you'll be able to watch the show go on if that's your inclination. For our first half hour, we have the Attorney General of North Dakota, Mr. Wayne Stengham. We'll be getting to him in a moment. First of all, I thought I'd give a quick run-through of some things that happened in the legislature today. First of all, if you're rooting for the University of North Dakota to get a new medical school out of the legislative session, you might be disappointed. The House today defeated a bill that included $55 million for the new medical school project. Basically, what's happened here is that project is broken into two parts. One of them is the part that was defeated today. It's a $55 million appropriations bill to construct a new medical school. There's also a bit of money in the university systems budget bill, approximately $68 million to construct it's also earmarked to build a new medical school, except it's a different project. Basically, what we're talking about here is the $68 million is set aside to build an addition to the existing medical school, which is an old hospital on the UND campus, and the other element of it is $55 million, which would essentially, what the strategy here was to combine the $68 and the $55 million in two separate bills in order to finance construction of an entirely new medical school. And the defeat of this measure could mean that it's more likely that a second option will be chosen, which is the renovation of the existing medical school and the construction of an addition onto it. Now, this is far from over. The legislature still has probably at least another 2 weeks to run, and there's going to be conference committee negotiations about this project and probably other pressure brought to bear as well on behalf of a new medical school, because a number of legislators are convinced that it is the most cost-effective long-term option for increasing the University of North Dakota's ability to train doctors and health service professionals. There is the North Dakota House gave final approval to a bill that says that there will be no jobless benefits for locked-out workers in the future. This was brought about by the American Crystal Sugar lockout, which is on its way to being over because the workers at American Crystal Sugar, the locked-out workers, on their fifth contract vote last weekend, decided to accept a company contract offer that has been on the table since the summer of 2011. I spoke to Job Service North Dakota about the progress of paying benefits to the American Crystal workers I was told that as many as 275 workers are likely to get benefits up to $2.25 million in payments, with an average payout of just over $8,000, and they hope to have all their payments made by the end of this month. In any case, this legislation that the House gave final approval to today will prevent in the future locked out workers from being paid unemployment benefits. And one of the critics of this bill is Foreman State Representative Bill Ammerman, who pointed out on the House floor that this sort of stratagem could actually encourage lockouts, because if a worker is locked out, the worker is not due unemployment benefits, and therefore the fact that the worker is locked out is not going to affect the employer's unemployment tax burden. Whereas if that worker is laid off, that worker files for unemployment, gets it, and it may affect how much unemployment tax the business has to pay. So in other words, there is an incentive if you want to do a layoff or some kind of temporary hiatus from work for your workforce. There is an incentive to lock them out instead of laying them off, because that way you don't have to pay unemployment benefits. And there was one other item of considerable import in the Fargo area. It has to do with the Fargo Diversion Project. Yesterday, the Senate approved an amendment that said essentially that the federal government has to pony up about $800 million for the Fargo Diversion Project before the state pays a dime toward diversion project features. The state could still pay for levee and dike protection for Fargo, but not for the diversion project. Well, this was changed in the Senate today. There was an amendment offered and accepted that would allow state money to be spent on the diversion project if there is federal authorization for the project and if federal appropriation has been approved. In other words, you don't have to have the whole wad of federal money in front of you before the state makes a move toward supporting the Fargo Diversion Project. Now, this bill is part of the State Water Commission's budget bill, and this too is going to be quite contentious as we draw to a close here in the legislature, and we'll see what shape the final elements of this Water Commission budget bill will take. Well, we have other matters to discuss with the Attorney General of North Dakota, Mr. Wayne Stenghjem. Welcome, Mr. Stenghjem.
Well, good to be with you, Dale, again.
Outstanding. I'm glad you're here. And you look very spiffy, by the
Thank
way,
you.
in your big dog's pullover. I just thought I'd mention that. One of the things I wanted to mention was a few days ago you took part in a signing ceremony that had to do with a bill on youth suicide prevention. And I wanted to know what that bill does and why you think it's useful.
In fact, that bill was just signed this afternoon by Governor Dalrymple, and it's one of those bills that has kind of been under the radar screen, but it deals with an issue that also is under the radar screen, unfortunately, but is a real epidemic, a silent epidemic in North Dakota and nationally, and that is the problem of youth suicide. It's realized by a number of people that suicide is the third leading cause of death for people aged 10 to 24. And for those in college, suicide is actually the second leading cause of death. Here in North Dakota, we know, according to a youth risk behavior survey, that 1 out of 4 of our state's young people say they felt sad or hopeless at some point in the last month, which could be the start of depression. But in addition to that, and much more alarming, is the fact that 1 out of 9 of our young people in North Dakota reported that they actually attempted suicide one time or more within the last 12 months. That's 10.8% of our young people in North Dakota who reported that to be the circumstance. Nationally, it's 7.8%. So we're in a much worse position even than we are nationally. But we do know that nationally about 100 young people take their own lives every week somewhere in the United States. So you can see it's a silent epidemic. It's a terrible problem that families have to contend with. And so what this bill does is to require that teachers in the schools must undergo, as part of the regular training, the in-service training that they do, every 2 years they have to have 2 hours of training on how to recognize when one of their students might be potentially suicidal, and then, second of all, tell them what they can do about it. We ask a lot, I know, of teachers to do a lot of things in addition to just educating our children. But when we have a problem of the magnitude that I just outlined for youth suicide, the one place that we know that that young people always come is to the schools. And so this kind of training is something that, of course, won't eliminate the problem, but I'm convinced that a year from now, 2 years from now, after this is been in effect, we'll find that there are students people are alive who would otherwise not have been.
I just want to make sure I heard you correctly. You said 1 in 10
1 in 9.
1 in 9 young people have attempted suicide within the last year.
Within the last 12 months.
That's shocking.
It is shocking. And the problem is bad enough. In most of the state of North Dakota, the rates of suicide on our Indian reservations are much worse than that. And so this is a real silent epidemic, and of course nothing can be worse for a parent than to lose a child under any circumstance. But when you have something like suicide, which is really largely preventable, too often young people tend to look at suicide as a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And this kind of assistance, I think, is something that will go a long way to help.
One of the things when I read the bill, I thought, is this training compulsory for everyone?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, they'll have to get that training, although they don't have to go anywhere. There are online training programs. I worked with an organization called the Jason Flatt Foundation. Jason Flatt was an individual who lived in Tennessee and a high school athlete, active in everything, and in 1997 he committed suicide. His parents have taken it upon themselves to make this a cause in their lives, and they started the Jason Flatt Foundation. They offer free online training for states like North Dakota. North Dakota is about the 12th state that has passed a law like this. So this training will be available. It will be free. It can be done online, but the teachers will be required to undergo it every other year.
Will training be offered to students and parents?
This particular training is not offered to parents and students, but this program is for teachers and for administrators, and is not designed. This training is not designed for them. But those programs do exist, and there are other places where people can go to obtain assistance.
Do you have any idea of what some of the elements of this training are?
Well, I looked at their online training, and it's very comprehensive. It's very thorough. It's very fact and medically and psychologically based, but it's just the kind of things that you need to watch out for to see if you have a student who is showing signs that might indicate they're depressed, that their grades are slipping, that they're withdrawing from their friendships. There's just a number of signs. And then the next thing to do, we don't expect the teachers, of course, they're not experts, but we do need to teach the teachers on where it is that they should go when they see a student who is in that kind of trouble, to report to the school counselor, to visit with the parents, or what have you, to make sure that something is done, rather than just to assume that these are teenagers and this is how they act.
So, in other words, this is designed to let teachers and administrators spot enough to they know to go to someone else.
That's right.
Who has more expertise.
That's right.
Okay.
Exactly so.
I was looking as well I was going through some of your bills, and I was looking at and this is frankly an awkward segue, but I was looking at the scrap metal bill, which got some resistance from some folks in the legislature that I talked to. It essentially, as I understand it, it's meant to regulate certain dealings that are undergone by scrap metal dealers, so that we can have some idea of whether they're buying hot goods, basically.
Scrap metal theft has been an increasing problem. It's and a huge problem here in North Dakota for a number of reasons. First of all, because the price of scrap metal, especially copper, has skyrocketed on a global basis, but also because there's so much construction going on here in North Dakota that these materials are available. And you can read in the newspaper, watching the news, the number of stories of enormous thefts of construction material, especially copper, that has been taking place just in the last few months. Grand Forks, 100,000 pounds. Dickinson, $50,000 worth of copper was stolen. Fargo, same kind of thing. And what we know about this, though not always the case, but what appears to be often the case, is these aren't isolated thefts. These are organized criminal enterprises that are traveling all around the state of North Dakota, from Fargo to Dickinson to Watford City to around in the oil country, Williston, and then stealing this material and then going to either A, sell it, or B, trade it for drugs. And so North Dakota is one of the two states, or it was one of two states that did not have a requirement for reporting sales of scrap metal. So when a scrap metal dealer purchases scrap metal from any individual, they are not required to make any kind of report. What this bill does is to require that any sale over $25, you have to get proof of identification from the individual who comes in and sells the property to the scrap metal dealer. And then in addition to that, anything over $1,000 can only be paid by electronic transfer or by check, not by cash. Over the last 2 years, because I'd introduced this bill 5 or 6 years ago, and it didn't pass. And so in the last year, I worked with the North Dakota scrap metal dealers and with the National Institute of Scrap Metal retailers to craft this kind of legislation, put it into a way that they thought that they could work with, that they would support it. So they did come in and support the bill. It had some resistance over in the House, not much, not enough anyway, because we were successful in getting the emergency clause put in this bill. So this law will take effect May 1st. So between now and then, my purpose is to get the word out. We'll be notifying the scrap metal dealers that this is on the books. We'll be doing a news release. I'll be appearing on shows like yours, Dale, to talk about it, to make sure they know what is required of them, because this is a huge problem, enormous opportunity for great profit, and it is a real expense for not just the construction industry, but among the supporters were the rural electric companies that came in and said they are seeing that people are stealing scrap. Sometimes they're even stealing power transformers off the off the sites.
That sounds like a risky enterprise.
It's exceedingly risky, but the potential for enormous profit for some people make it worthwhile. And so this is something we need to do. So we will now be the 49th state. The only state that doesn't have legislation like this now is Alaska. And so I don't think many of our thieves will be driving up to Alaska with their material. But what it does point out is that this isn't only about scrap metal. Because what I have to report is that we are seeing an alarming increase in the amount of crime and the kind of crime that we're seeing, particularly in the oil patch area of the state of North Dakota. The scrap metal theft is something that gets a lot of media attention because it's one area of theft that is in huge amounts, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and it makes the news when it happens. But there's lots of other things going out there that are of concern. In this area, as I mentioned before, with scrap metal, in addition to that problem, these are largely organized criminal activities. And so these are groups that are going out, and it really points out that we need to do a lot with law enforcement as we move ahead with our continued oil development.
How many scrap yards are there in North Dakota?
Well, there are a number. There are, I would say, 6 or 8 of the big ones that would be well known. And you drive around Bismarck, for example, and you can see the 2 large ones that are here. There are a lot of smaller operations in the state of North Dakota who just buy them on a come-as-you-go basis that aren't as large and well-known as the ones that you see when you drive around the big cities.
If you're like an itinerant scrap metal buyer, do you need to be licensed?
Yep. No, we do not have any licensing, no licensing requirements for any of these folks. But what they will be required to do now is to keep a record, so that law enforcement can go around and visit these sites and see if there's someone who seems to be coming in quite often with new, or sometimes they'll burn the insulation off the copper wire so it looks like scrap, or they'll cut it up into 2-foot sections. They'll do lots of different things, but if it's the same person kind of traveling around from dealer to dealer, we'll be able to track them and find out what they're doing.
What was the state of the law before this happened? I mean, could you just go in and sell your scrap metal for cash?
That's exactly right. You could go in and sell the scrap metal for cash, and it was happening. And there's nothing, of course, usually nothing wrong with doing that, as long as you legitimately came by the material that you're seeking to sell. And that happens. Farmers and construction people, they are constantly bringing things into scrap metal dealers, and that's just fine.
So if you're a frat boy who stole a beer keg, you've got something to worry about now.
Beer kegs are actually exempted because they're covered under other law that requires that they have serial numbers on them, and the beer kegs are actually registered, so they're exempted from this particular law, as are aluminum cans. So people are out picking up cans along the highways and bringing them in don't have to comply with this because the thieves aren't stealing aluminum cans.
You mentioned that there was resistance to this several years ago. What Why was there no resistance to it now?
Well, I think that I like to think it's because I sat down with the dealers before introducing the bill, worked it out in a fashion that was acceptable and that they were willing to accept, and thought that it made good sense. And the ones that I met with said they don't want to make money by buying stolen property from thieves. They want to make money from legitimate operation of their business. And to their credit, they came in, they supported the bill. They said they think this is a good idea, and they're happy to work with it.
One of the things that's been talked about quite a bit during the session is the possible legal expense of defending the abortion bills that the legislature has passed. What is your opinion of that?
Hard to say now. There's 4 bills now that have been enacted just this session alone. In addition to that, we're already defending one in Fargo right now that was passed in 2011. So when I worked through my budget, I did go in and discuss with the Appropriations Committee on the Senate side the fact we need to address and consider how much it is that we're going to have to spend. Now we're in a little bit of a state of flux because, as you know, there are petitions circulating to refer those laws to the voters. If those petitions are filed, and it's 13,750 or so signatures, if they're filed and they are legitimate signatures, once they're filed, the law is suspended. And so none of those laws would then take effect until June of 2014. So there would be no point to a lawsuit up until that point. If the petitions aren't filed, I assume that one or all of those will be litigated. And so I needed to discuss with them the options that we have. And one of them is I can hire an additional lawyer because we can handle one lawsuit maybe of this significance with the staff we have. But our lawyers aren't sitting around waiting for a case to come in. They're very busy. And so one option is hire an additional lawyer to handle this, or the other one, contract with another law firm or another lawyer to handle the litigation. I suggested to them that the sum that I thought would be sufficient, and this is only an estimate, is $400,000. And I arrived at that figure because I looked at expenses for previous litigation like this we'd undertaken before. I called some of my Attorney General colleagues around the country who have defended this kind of legislation before as well. And after doing that, came up with a figure that $400,000 seemed reasonable, recognizing, A, I don't have to spend it all. It'll be in a fund, and if I don't need it, then it'll just be there, and the next session we'll have it available. And B, if more money is needed, I can go to the Emergency Commission. They have a contingency appropriation, and they'll be available to provide additional funding if we need it. Do
you think you'll be hiring a person or contracting?
I haven't decided what to do, and a lot of that just depends on a number of things. And they all the options have pros and cons to them. But until I actually know, are the petitions filed? Is it going to be suspended? Are we going to have one, or are we going to have 4 lawsuits? Those are things I just don't know at this point. So I don't have a preferred course of action right now.
Can you give me like a 30-second reaction to the DUI bill, the latest iteration?
Well, we need to improve our DUI laws. We need to make them tougher. I think everybody agrees with that. I rather like the bill as it was introduced. It came out of the House. The Senate made some changes to it. It's a little weaker than I thought, but I've been visiting with some of the conferees who are working on it. I think the bill will be a little bit tougher. And at the end of the day, when the session adjourns, we are going to have a tough DUI law, much tougher DUI law here in North Dakota, and that's a good thing. We need it.
We've been speaking to the Attorney General of North Dakota, Wayne Stenjum, and he's been the Attorney General since 2000. Before that, he was a state senator from Grand Forks and a practicing lawyer there. And thank you for your time.
Anytime, Dale.
Mr. Attorney General. And next we will have a gentleman from the Northwest Landowners Association.
Brought to you in part by Prairie Outpost Log Homes. Your custom lifestyle exemplified through custom timber work, design, and build. See Prairie Outpost on Facebook or call 701-667-2123.
American Family Insurance has all the answers to your questions about renter's insurance.